Wonderful. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. This is Ibrahim Begheri. I'm a professor of electrical, computer, and biomedical engineering at Toronto Metropolitan University here in Toronto, Canada. And I'm the director for the NSERC CREATE program on responsible development of AI, which is a 6-year multidisciplinary, multi-sector training initiative to build sustainable connections, research and training, and knowledge mobilization for training high-quality, highly qualified trainees in Canada's fastest growing knowledge economy sector. A lot of you are from our Responsible AI program. For those of you who are joining us as guests, I welcome you. So I have a distinct pleasure of introducing our amazing speaker, Renee Hobbs, who is a professor of communication studies at the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island and founder of the Media Education Lab. She's the author of Media Literacy in Action, Mind Over Media Propaganda Education for a Digital Age, and also Create to Learn, among many other amazing publications. So very welcome, Renee. She will be talking to us about why AI consumers need Sapere Aude.
Wow, good pronunciation, Ibrahim. Thank you so much for welcoming me to your community. Your program is a really innovative one, and I'm delighted to be here. And I see people I know and care about in the audience, and I'm welcoming you as well. But let me see if I can share my screen and see what's happening here. Hold on here. I guess I can share my screen. I've got to figure out how to do that. Hold on just a second. Boy. Back to Zoom. Share screen with sound, right? With sound. Share, optimize for sound. There we go. Okay, so Sapere Aude. What a cool phrase, right? If you took Latin in high school, you might have been attracted to that phrase, or maybe you never heard of it, and that's okay too, right? But by the end of this session, you'll understand why AI consumers need Sapere Aude, and you'll actually get 3 specific action steps that are critical for AI consumers today. So what is Sapere Aude? Well, it translates as have the courage to make use of your own intellect. That's a beautiful idea, isn't it? And it comes from a passage in Horace that basically says something like this: he who has begun is half done. Dare to know, begin. So there's an intellectual history to Sapere Aude. It's not just a cool Latin phrase. It's an idea with a long historical legacy. So let's talk a little bit about the intellectual history of Sapere Aude, and then I think you'll understand why. I think it's so relevant to this current era of living in an AI saturated society. Sapere Aude was first articulated by Horace, right? He was a Roman poet in the 3rd century, right? He was kind of a snarky guy. And, you know, his claim to fame is that he wrote really interesting poetry about the rich and the famous. He himself was not the rich and famous. He was kind of a middle-class guy who was smart and talented, but he wrote snarky poems about the leadership in Rome, and he did it cautiously enough and carefully enough that he didn't get in trouble. But he was kind of famous for this ironic criticism. The kind of poetry that he was kind of famous for was kind of shame and blame poetry, they called it. Right? Yeah. So I think he would be very comfortable in the blogosphere. he would be very comfortable in the blogosphere using his shame and blame poetry to get attention as he did, but not go to jail, right? Shame and blame poetry, using the power of language to comment and criticize the ruling elite. Hundreds of years later, in the 18th century, Immanuel Kant used the term sapere aude. He's sometimes understood as the father of the Enlightenment, right? And the Enlightenment was such a cool period in world history where folks started thinking about the power of reasoning and the utility of evidence. And actually, they deeply believed that if humans used reasoning, facts, and evidence, that essentially they would promote universal understanding across all the peoples of the world. Kant was an idealist for sure. And he made Sapere Aude very popular. Have the courage to use your own intellect. Don't just rely on what other people said. And that was important because at the time of the Enlightenment, a lot of people were just slavishly looking back to the Romans and Greeks and going, what did they say? And Kant said, no, that's not enough. Have the courage to use your own reasoning process. And Enlightenment was born. Couple hundred years later, kind of a famous philosopher, that's, if you don't recognize him, that's okay. That's Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault, well, he had this kind of darker perspective on sapere aude. He said, well, good luck with having the courage to use the power of your own intellect, because you can't really do that. You are situated in time and space and social institutions that have power relationships, and you can't escape from them. There's no exit, Foucault told us, from the power structures that bind us together in terms of economics and politics and culture. He said we can't escape our positions inside these systems. But even knowing that we can't escape, we still have freedom. And so he wasn't keen on sapere aude. He didn't think it was a get out of jail free card, but he did understand that being aware of the structures of power and knowledge that shape how we behave in the world were important. So all three of these, could I say it? Dead white men. All three of these dead white men believed that it was important to be courageous, to speak one's own truth to power. Not truth to power, because all of them recognized that they were situated in time and space and had a limited understanding of reality, but they all emphasized this idea of being courageous. So that sets the stage for thinking about how the concept of sapere aude applies in today's world. So to make sense of AI in today's world, we will borrow from the Greek philosophers. They said there were really only three ways that we could know anything or communicate with anyone or make sense of reality. We could do it with logos, that's facts and logic. We could do it with pathos, that's emotion. And we could do it with ethos, which is character. Unfortunately, contemporary interpretations of the classical Greek rhetoric sometimes created a hierarchy, right? With logos at the top and then emotion down below and even further down below character. But the Greeks didn't see it that way. They said all three of these ways of sense making sense of our complex reality, all three were super important. And I think that's worth thinking about in relation to AI. Let's talk a little bit about the third one, because people have heard about logos, that's facts and logic, and they've heard about pathos, that's emotion. But a lot of people haven't heard about ethos. So I want to drill down on that one a little bit. Ethos is the way that we make sense of the world through assessing people's character, their credibility. And the Greeks understood that ethos had two features. There was the kind of credibility that comes from your authority, your expertise, your status, your links to institutional power. But the Greeks also recognized that there was a kind of credibility that came from authenticity, from the feelings of relational closeness and similarity, and dare I say it, even charisma, right? And so, of course, we are living in a time right now that has kind of been shifting its balance about ethos, right? As we are more and more suspicious of experts and public health insights and people with titles, especially if they are associated with government, right? And we are very keen on influencers, right? People who might not be any smarter than us, might not know any more than us, but who we can relate to, right? They can explain things in ways that we can understand and appreciate. So authenticity is a really intriguing feature of our contemporary communication environment. And authenticity has really interesting implications for AI, as we will consider. So we've got experts and influencers in the public sphere, influencing people by informing them, persuading them, and entertaining them. And in all the cases where humans use the power of communication and action, trust happens. Whether you trust experts or whether you trust influencers, trust is essential for human survival. And trust happens when we place our reliance in the integrity or truthfulness of someone or something. And so right now we're at a time where we're wondering, can we trust AI? Can we trust the summary provided from the platform called Consensus, which takes some scholarly articles, and you can ask a question and it will synthesize scholarly articles and produce a cogent, tightly reasoned summary. Wow, cool. Can we trust it? Can we trust it? Well, we all know the answer to that is, well, it depends. So it depends. And the fact that we recognize the potential of trusting AI and the risks of trusting AI is just exactly where we would expect to be with a technology this new. It's possible that even 100 years from now, we'll still be in that in-between place, right? Trusting and not trusting. That's possible. But understanding the architecture of trust is a part of what we have to consider as we think about how do people come to trust AI platforms and the tools that are surrounding them. And to understand trust, of course, there's a lot of different terms and different fields in the humanities and social sciences for the word trust, right? But some people have called it social cohesion, right? And this is a kind of an interesting visual diagram of social cohesion, right? It says for people to have a sense of social cohesion, well, there needs to be trust. It's right there in the middle. And that has to be both institutional trust and interpersonal trust, social trust. that social cohesion has something to do with inclusive identity, perhaps national identity, and perhaps also one's group identity, and that social cohesion has something to do with cooperation for the common good, either as state and society cooperate or as groups cooperate. Wow. Okay, so through the power of communication and action, people can come to trust each other. And trust happens when we are sensitive to the power relations that are depicted in this diagram. All right, so now we're here, right? What about trust and social cohesion? What happens when it comes to algorithmically personalized knowledge, right? Well, one thing that happens is that my Google is not your Google, right? My Netflix is not your Netflix, right? And that may have a impact on social trust. And I want to explore this issue of trust and algorithmic personalization through an extended example. So, just to frame up what we're talking about here, whatever terms we're using, we're looking at machine learning environments that involve neural networks and classifications and systems of data mining and deep learning and lots of different kinds of algorithms. We're talking about a really complex constellation of technologies coming together now with generative AI. And what's super cool is that it's becoming available to everyone. Sometimes with people who are not engineers and are not computer scientists, but just ordinary folks. So check out this Wall Street Journal article, How I Built an AI-Powered Self-Running Propaganda Machine for $105. I paid a website developer to create a fully automated AI-generated pink slime news site programmed to create false political stories. The results were impressive and in an election year, alarming. So, well, what does that look like? What's that all about? Here's an example of one of the things. I think this might be actually the thing he built. You've seen lots and lots of websites like this, right? It looks like $100 website, right? I'm not being too critical of the programmer, but yeah. So it's easy to make stuff that looks like news, but is basically curating whatever you want to be there. I wonder if you notice anything about this. In the chat, I'll invite you to make some observations about what's this called? The Beacon State Press. And this category, it says Ohio News. What's going on? What inferences can you make about the algorithms that are driving this dynamic, I'm putting it in quotes, news site? Open up your chat and tell me what you notice. Go ahead. What do you notice about the algorithmic personalization that might be going on here? You can unmute your microphone and offer some observations as well. Well, it's a quiet group. It's a quiet.
We have some folks saying Bernie Moreno is mentioned a lot.
Yes, he is. Good observation. Yeah. So it makes you wonder what's going on with Bernie Moreno. Does the guy who created this platform, does he love Bernie or hate Bernie? What is your thoughts about that? It's hard to tell. But Bernie Moreno is everywhere, right? So these kind of platforms usually aren't as obviously stupid as this one. But the idea of algorithmic propaganda, algorithmic personalization, sometimes hard for us to spot when the biases of the programmer match our own biases, right? And that's, of course, the famous filter bubble phenomenon you are aware of. But there's another thing that makes us vulnerable to algorithmic propaganda. Here is a cartoon. You see Karl Rove. For Canadians, you should know that Karl Rove was a Republican strategist who worked for the Bush administration. And there he is sitting with Plato saying, but surely you agree that truth can be created by the repetition of a lie. Whoa. Now, why is it that repeating something can make it seem true? The floor is open. It's true that you can make something seem true by repeating it, but why is that? Open your microphone if you have a thought about that question.
I just saw a post that someone in my network did the other day about some experiments that were done during World War II, where people were bombarded by lies. And after a certain number of days, they believed them so strongly that they couldn't be convinced otherwise. So I think it must be some part of our brain or human nature.
Yeah, some part of our brain or human nature makes judgments about reality based on frequency.
Sorry, Mariana. It's just okay. Go ahead.
Hey, Renee. Hi, everybody. I think it's also a lot easier to believe a certain view if you're not exposed to anything else, which is what happens in the current environment.
Great point. So that repetition of lies maybe crowd out other information. Nice observation. Why is it that we tend to find that repeated lies start to seem like truth?
I would also add that repeating it often, even if it's untrue, equates its value and importance ever greater. Think of a celebrity, if you see them constantly in the news, obviously you'd think they're a rising star.
Great observation. Repetition is a form of status that
Renee,
signals
back in the advertising days of the 70s and 80s, they talked about the threshold effect. Like you would see an ad X number of times, then after that X number of times, it became truth to you, you know?
Exactly. Sananda.
Hi. Is there also this contagion effect that Facebook sort of experiments through their platform? That if it is repeated and if it is if you can do a little tweak on their algorithms, it can catch on.
That a very important idea there, the idea of emotional contagion. And of course, algorithms are constantly being adjusted for engagement. That's the thing that platforms are trying to get. Carolyn.
I read a paper recently that talked about like people feeling social pressure to conform. I think the study did something like asked a person about an opinion when they were alone, and then they brought them into a group where everyone had the opposite opinion, and people were a lot more likely to just agree with the group because of like the social pressures.
Excellent. It's actually the very first and most important finding in the field of social psychology, that the presence of other people in the group shape our perceptions of the world. And when other people around us say the lines are of equal length, even though they don't look equal to us, we tend to conform to what the group sees. Okay, so it's not only true that repetition can make a lie seem true, it's also true that repetition can make something seem beautiful as well. And so I want to pivot a little bit to talking about the blurry boundaries between entertainment, persuasion, and information. And you know what? I am really getting sick of it that information is getting all the attention. Information's sucking all the air out of the room. And so algorithmic systems shape information, persuasion, and entertainment. And I think entertainment hasn't gotten enough attention. So I'd like to explore that one a little bit.
Renee?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to
Oh, hey,
insert one
Jeff.
thing. Hi, before you go on, it's related to both of these topics. It's sort of a bridge. I remember reading a while back that in China, one of the ways that they practice propaganda was by paying people to flood the channels with just not lies, but just irrelevant stuff. So it's kind of the flip side of the practicing of, repeating a lie makes it more true. This was like by making the frequency of the truth much less in proportion to everything else, they made it seem irrelevant.
That is a great observation, Jeff. Thank you so much for sharing. So what about algorithmic systems, trust, and entertainment? Okay, so let's go to Spotify, shall we? In the chat, if you have a Spotify system, you can just put your thumbs up there. Is Spotify something that the people in this room are using? I'm not sure. Let me know if you're a Spotify user. I want to hear from you. Put your thumb in the air. Let me know.
Are we thinking Spotify specifically here?
We're talking specifically Spotify.
Okay, all right.
That's the
thumbs.
platform that you might be paying $10 or $11 a month for. You might be using it. You might be using one of those other music recommendation systems. I'm sharing for you my Spotify homepage, and you can tell a lot about me from my homepage, can't you? So I invite you to make some inferences about me based on my Spotify page. I snapped this morning. What do you notice? What inferences can you make about me?
Well, clearly you have an interest in jazz because
Yeah.
the largest album that's offered to you is Vocal Jazz by Samara Joy, and it's picked for you. So obviously the
Yeah.
algorithm probably noticed you listen to a lot of jazz, whether it be smooth or not, and said we'll propose this to her, we'll see whether or not she likes it. If she likes this, then we'll propose even more to keep her coming.
Yeah, or
Nice.
maybe you've been attending jazz events recently. Maybe you purchased a jazz concert ticket.
Okay, it's possible, Matt, that some of my other behavior might relate to that. What else? What other guesses can you make about me based on my Spotify?
I say that it's possible that you have some Brazilian friends because you have a daily mix which is made up almost entirely of classical Brazilian music. Very cool stuff, actually.
And
daily mix number one.
And you might know that I've been to Portugal recently, and that might have something to do with it for sure. And you see that strange pan flute there? I had a Romanian friend visit me a weekend or two ago, and she introduced me to that artist, right? So, and if you didn't know that I'm from Detroit originally, you could tell by that Marvin Gaye radio, right? And soul mix as well. A child of the 80s, Best of Pete Townsend is on that playlist library. And the strange song was the last thing I played. What was the last thing I played on Spotify? Can you tell? It's down there at the bottom of the page. Shall We Gather at the River, which is a spiritual. And don't ask me why I was listening to that because I'm really not sure. All right. So we're going to do a deep dive on Spotify algorithms and Spotify AI, and we're going to see what kinds of critical questions we can ask. Okay. Let's watch a 5-minute movie. As we're watching this movie, I'd like you to think about how this video makes you feel, what jumps out for you, and what questions it raises. Ready? Let's watch.
At the time of writing this video, Spotify has categorized 5,987 distinct genres of music, a number that has almost certainly increased by the time you're watching this now. Unless you can name all nearly 6,000 of them, there's a pretty good chance you're a fan of a genre you haven't even heard of. Perhaps you enjoy gothabilly, neurostep, or blackened deathcore. You could be a listener of baps, bebop, or funk. But the fact of the matter is that you don't really need to know exactly what kind of music you like, because Spotify already has you all figured out. Every week, for every user, they're able to tailor a 30-song playlist to that person's exact music tastes, ranging from the world's most popular artists to the most niche indie productions on the platform. But have you ever wondered how? I mean, you probably have, because that's why you clicked on this video. So, here's how. Spotify's recommendation system is composed of 3 different algorithms, which makes it 3 times better than one algorithm because of math. The first of these 3 actually has nothing to do with the music itself, and it's called collaborative filtering. This is basically the way that Netflix recommends new shows, by writing a 6,000-word end-user license agreement that gives them permission to record everything you do until you die or throw your phone into a volcano. Located in Spotify's giant matrix room, pictured here, they've stored a giant matrix. It's roughly 433 million rows by 80 million columns, indexing every single user and every single song on the platform and recording how often each person listens to each song. This is simplifying things a bit, but this matrix allows them to objectively determine which users are most similar. If one row is hitting all the same columns as another row, that means those 2 people are listening to the same songs. And if one of those rows has an active column that the other doesn't have, then that song would, theoretically, be good to recommend. Basically what I'm saying is, if you want to ruin a specific person's Spotify, all you have to do is make a new account, listen to all their favorite songs, and then listen to Tornado Siren sound effects by royalty-free music and sound effect factories 70,000 times. Now, Spotify can't rely entirely on collaborative filtering. It's not very accurate, especially when it comes to people's multifaceted music tastes, and it tends to just promote generally popular music while burying things that don't have a ton of listening data to work with, like the Sam from Wendover's Old Time Jamboree Band, even if their music is hot fire. That's where the next algorithm comes in. Spotify's natural language processing system. You see, one of the best ways to categorize songs is with words, and it turns out that the internet has a whole bunch of them. Spotify is constantly gathering text associated with its songs. It'll look at text on its own platform, stuff like song titles, playlist descriptions, and lyrics, but it'll also pull data from the rest of the internet. Spotify scrapes song reviews, news articles, comment sections, you name it, and all this goes into building an associated word bank for each song and artist on its platform. Here's one such table generated by EchoNest, the music data company that Spotify purchased in 2014 for the phrase ABBA. As you can see, it has the noun phrases most commonly associated with ABBA, as well as the adjectives most commonly used when describing ABBA. Using this table, you can intuit that ABBA fans will probably like other things that are frequently described with perky, non-violent, and Swedish, such as Greta Thunberg or this stuffed shark that has its own subreddit for some reason. But at this point, you've probably noticed something weird. All of this data that Spotify is using, the adjectives, the song titles, the listening frequencies, none of it is gathered from the music itself. So that raises the question, can Spotify actually listen to its own music? And the answer, interestingly, is yes. This is where our third algorithm comes in, Spotify's sonic profiles. Here's how they work. For each song on the platform, Spotify generates something called a time frequency representation, which looks something like this. This axis is time, this axis is frequency, and warmer colors mean louder decibel levels, so, for example, at exactly 12 seconds into this song, these are the frequencies that are most present. This representation is then dumped into a neural network where these rectangles make the song smaller, and these rectangles are borderline sentient, and their only purpose in life is to extract semantic data from your ex-boyfriend's mixtape. The neural network isolates all of the major features of the song, stuff like its key, tempo, timbre, loudness, and time signature, and compares these qualities individually against other songs you like and other songs you haven't heard. Then, in tandem with the collaborative filtering system and natural language processing algorithm, these sonic profiles are used to precisely hone in on songs that are acoustically similar enough to the kind of music you already listen to, while also experimenting with one or two variables to avoid presenting you with anything too stale. And there you go. That's how to spend $11 billion a year convincing people to not just listen to the same 3 Taylor Swift songs on repeat for the rest of their life. Now, while it might be worth shelling out $10 a month for a robot to tell you what you like, I've got a better value proposition for you, and it's called Nebula.
Okay. So this guy, half as interesting, is going to make a little segue to promote his own company. Let's take a look.
3 years ago, my friends and I got together and launched our very own streaming site to free us and other educational creators from the shackles of the YouTube algorithm. The results have been amazing. Nebula has paved the way for ambitious.
Okay, he's going to promote his own platform, and I'm not going to let him do that. I'm going to continue on. All right, if you watch that video.
At the time of writing this video.
If you watch that video with me, one obvious reaction is, gee whiz. My gosh, that is kind of amazing, right? All kinds of gee whiz things, like Spotify knows a lot about me based on how I use it. Spotify uses text from the internet for purposes of algorithmic personalization. Spotify uses mathematical representations of sound in creating recommendations, and platforms that use human curation, like the author of this video, are competing with those that use algorithmic personalization, right? But in addition to playing gee whiz, I can also engage in just wondering. And just wondering is harder than gee whiz. And it takes a little bit more time. Just wondering, will the instantaneity of streaming devalue any music that isn't instantly accessible? Does streaming make the discovery of new musical genres easier or harder? How do streaming services teach musical formulas and conventions to listeners? How do streaming services affect the incentives for musicians to make money? In the future, will the work of music critics become more important or less important? If streaming services are optimized to promote more listening, is that really a good thing? Okay, now it's your turn. What questions did that video get you wondering about? The floor is open.
One thing I'm interested in is for sure Spotify and other like Apple Music are telling record labels that we have an algorithm, we have this many users, this is our success rate and the retention, the renewal of subscriptions. So let's make a deal. You have a new artist that's like, you know, name anybody you want on today's radio, and we can promote her on with our users that we find would correlate with what she's promoting in her songs, and let's make a deal in monetary value, and you know, in the sense that you have more leverage as a company in terms of negotiation, because you could actually deliver on results based on the algorithm.
Yeah, and that's what radio did since the 1920s. So yeah, that model is an old, very successful business model, the radio model now being used with streaming platforms. Thanks so much. Who's next? Mariana. What questions does that video raise for you?
I think that they have, the algorithms have eliminated one important aspect of the creative process, because music artists used to craft an entire album as a cohesive package, as a narrative, right? And it's almost impossible to hear a complete album nowadays, or find one.
Great observation. So some features of musical creativity are shifting and changing. Thanks for sharing. Who's next? What questions did you find yourself wondering about as you watched that video? We hear from one more person. Maybe
So
not.
it-
Yeah.
It invites the musical equivalent of search engine optimization for people producing music.
Say more about that.
So Google works hard to keep people from coming up with little tricks that will get their websites to show up first in a list of websites. And this could potentially be reverse engineered to get your music to show up first as well.
Yeah, that's a great observation. It's absolutely the case that when we engage in gee whiz and just wondering, we have to kind of acknowledge the awe behind these platforms and systems and the constellation of technologies that are underneath them. And gee whiz also invites us to try to understand the math magic, because algorithms are math, right? And yet to most of us, they seem magical. But once we learn about them, we start to see that they're math magic. And understanding that helps us it helps us in judging the credibility of these platforms. And when it comes to just wondering, these platforms make us ask, what am I missing? Whose voices and points of view am I missing? Who benefits and who is harmed by these platforms? And what are the unintended consequences? So now it comes back to courage. Gee whiz is easy, and just wondering is hard, but hey, we all have questions. But where courage comes in is in dialogue and discussion. With these algorithmic systems, it's important for us to share our ideas and interpretations of them with others, and to imagine policies that can protect the common good, and to understand that it's our responsibility to work collaboratively to improve society and make sure these platforms are in fact benefiting us and not using us. So in conclusion, the courage of Sapere Aude is a three-step process. Appreciating what digital platforms and technologies can and cannot do. Number two, asking critical questions and wondering about effects, outcomes, implications, and consequences. And number three, the thing we're doing right here in this session, engaging in public dialogue and discussion that leads to social action. So being courageous involves these components of critical thinking. It's a kind of media literacy, and it's available to all of us, whether we're engineers or computer scientists or humanities folks or technology folks, or from whatever backgrounds and fields we come from. So that's why consumers need Sapere Aude. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that very engaging, interesting talk. I can see the virtual claps all coming in. Thank you, Renee. Calvin, you want to stop recording at this